Hi, this is Jim Rogers. Welcome back to our lessons in wood turning tool usage. In our first lesson, we talked about using the spindle roughing gouge to get a piece of wood generally round. And I promised in lesson 2 we would start to use the skew chisel to improve it. Well, maybe not a wooden one like this, but let's go back at the table and take a look at some of the various variations we have on these tools, and then we'll come back and make some cuts. Here we are at the bench, and with my favorite wooden chisel. And I wanted to show you some characteristics about the skew chisel. Number one, it has 2 bevels and a very fine cutting edge. It makes it a very practical, very useful tool, but also one that requires a good learning curve on it. It has a long point, which is called the toe, and a short point, which we call the heel. On the long point, the back edge is flat, so that when I use the tool in a certain kind of cut, I can stand it on the tool rest like this, and it's vertical, stays vertical. I don't get a rocking motion. On the heel, or the short point, many of the tools have this edge radiused or rounded over, so for other kind of cuts I can make motions like this easily. Let me show you some just general examples of what some skew chisels that I have look like. So starting right here, this is one that was made by Alan Lacer many years ago, and he still has it on the market today. It's a pretty sizable tool, but it has all the characteristics of a good skew chisel. It has a flat on the long point, has a radius on the short point. In our classroom, we've had to buy tools from time to time, and this is one I acquired. And I think the handle maybe is just a little too long for the spindle work that we generally do. It's radiused here on the short point, and it's not quite flat here, meaning that when I stand this tool up to do cuts, I've got to be very careful to get it absolutely straight up and down when that's necessary. There's another brand, and here's the opposite extreme. Both sides are flat. And if I was to modify this tool on the on the heel, I would want this to be radiused so I could round this. I like this flat. Coming on over here, here's one that I put my own handle on. I bought it unhandled, but it has the right characteristics, and it's a smaller size for doing smaller work. If you do work with pins, finials, small goblets, things like that, smaller tools will be much easier to manipulate. So this is one of my favorite tools. They wear out after a while. This one's just about gone. I have put a very strong radius on this one, which makes it great for planing cuts and cleanup cuts, but not so good for doing fine detail work. We'll talk about those planing and detail cuts as we go through the rest of this lesson. I use this one a lot. I turn a lot of pins, and this one seems to be just about the right size for those kind of tasks, where the billet is just about the size of my finger. Really small work, I modified a round nose scraper that I bought years ago, converted into a skew for doing really, really fine work. There's a few accessories that you're going to have to use. Some way to bring this keen edge back, because sometimes just the stone on the edge is enough to bring the sharpness back. Here's a stone, here's a DMT stone, here is a pocket hone that I carry. It's about the size of a credit card, so it easily fits in my pocket. This is about a $15 accessory that it's always with me, and it seems to be very, very useful. When we sharpen, a strop is always a good thing, because when the edge goes away, maybe I can just take a piece of leather on a board with a little bit of rouge and rub the edge of the tool and bring my sharpness back. Then if that's not good enough, I'll probably go and use one of these. And under the worst of circumstances, I then go to the grinder and do some sharpening. So let's now go back to the lathe, take some of these tools and make some of those basic cuts that we were talking about. Okay, here we are back at the lathe again. I want to make a few cuts with the, I'm going to take the skew chisel that has the rounded edge, because it's really nice for making a cleaning cut. What makes this nice is that these 2 points are back away from the edge, so as I run across the wood, they're less likely to dig in and catch. So I've got my piece of wood mounted, the same one we used last time. Let's see where my speed is set at. That's about 1500, that sounds fine. I've raised my tool rest just a little bit because rather than working where I had the spindle roughing gouge, I want to bring it up so it's easier for me to see. And so I'm going to be working at about, if this is a clock face, just about where 11 o'clock would be. So my hand's on the tool's on the rest. I'm going to take the bevel of the tool and place it against the wood, not cutting, and then I'm going to slowly raise my right hand until I just get some dust. As soon as I get the dust, I stop moving my hands and my arms, and I transverse the piece with my feet and my legs, locking this triangle tightly together. So this is what it looks like. Tool's on the tool rest, it's on the wood, handle comes up, dust. Now, I didn't get all the way across, and I held the tool straight and smooth, and what it did, it took off the high spots. And places where the wood was a little lower, it passed over those. So it's leveling this whole surface out. So for the second cut, I'll make it a little longer. Maybe I'll be able to get all the way down to here with one continuous cut. Tool rest, wood, raise, dust. Now, you heard it quiet at some places and a little noisier, a little bouncy in different places. Where it was quiet, it was taking a very light cut. Where it bounced and took a deeper cut, the sound changed. So now I have this thing doggone near flat. A little bit this end I haven't touched, so I'll go the other direction. I have to turn the tool over, go off the end because I don't want to catch into these fibers. But this now becomes left-handed work. And I'm going to change my foot position. Do precisely the same thing I did before. And finish off, going the other direction. So right now, if I was working in furniture, you could say this is probably ready for a coat of paint. But we got more details to work on, and maybe a different tool might be nicer for doing some of the cuts I want to show you next. We'll put this one away. Let's take a different tool. This one has a straight edge, not the radiused curve. And it's going to be nice for doing another kind of cut I want to show you, which is a V-cut. We start off in our beginning classes with the spindle roughing gouge. The very next tool we touch is the Skew Chisel for planing, like we've just done. And we also teach doing V-cuts. This is the tool that has the flat edge on the long point. So when I set it on the tool rest, it's going to sit perfectly straight. If it cocks off one direction or the other slightly, and I engage this in the wood, it's going to cut a screw thread for me and run off to one direction or the other. So I'm going to pull it back to rest just a second. Now on the back camera here we can see the tool sitting on the tool rest, and the long point is down, and I'm simply just going to raise the handle. And that's all I get. And if I push harder, it's not going to do anything but maybe burn the wood. So if I want a bigger groove, I'm going to take the tool and move it slightly to the right. Not roll it, but move it and make another V-cut, engaging there first, about a 32nd of an inch over. And another one. And I'm making the same cut, raising the handle, at the same time moving it forward with my left hand, keeping it square. And if I go too far, let's go way over here. I'm just going to start another cut. And I don't want to do that. I want to keep widening this cut. Now I've done all those cuts from one side, and I want to clean up the other side to match. I'm going to change hands and probably make one cut over here. Well, maybe two. And I've gone all the way to the bottom. And now I've made what's called a V-cut. And the characteristics with that, done with the skew chisel, this is cutting into the end grain of the wood. And if you can see real close, you'll see this is as smooth as glass down in here. So what this is a decorative cut. It can also be used to do layout marks. Let's say I want to be down 1 inch, and I lay that out, measure it, and another inch, another inch. I can use this for layout marks. I can also use it for this decorative marks. I could maybe just want to put a little decorative line in here. Maybe another little one here. That's a little too big. And that might be a decorative cut that we could do. So I've shown you planing cuts. I've now shown you V cuts. And you know, let's just think this thing is a little dull. I think maybe we ought to go to the grinders and actually do a major sharpening job on this. So let's adjourn for a minute, go over to the grinder area, and pick up again. Okay, we're at the sharpening system again, and I want to show you 2 different ways of sharpening the skew chisels. One is a machine way, and the other is the way we do it in the classroom, which we think is a little safer for us. So you take your grinder, if you're using the one-way Varigrind system, insert the long arm, and there is a particular fixture that's just for using skew chisels. It goes on the end of the arm, locks down, and your skew then is placed in one pocket on the left, lined up, sharpened this way. It's taken out, put on the other side, and the other side sharpened. You'll get a little bit of radius, but very little, because of the movement through this arc. But this gives you a very repeatable grind. It works fine for the oval skew chisels, which we do not use in the classroom because this is the only safe way to really do an oval skew. We don't do this, actually. Sorry about that. So let's show you how we really do it in the classroom. This is, I think, a safer method to use. It requires a little bit more skill. What we've said is we set the platform at the angle for all the skews in the classroom so we can sharpen them like this. But I need to test that to be sure it's the right angle. So we'll go back to a felt marker like we did in the last lesson. And I'm just going to black up the edge, both sides. And I'm going to turn the grinder on for just a second. And I'm going to be able to find out whether this is the right angle. It's taking all of the ink off, which means this platform is going to match the curve on this tool, so I can go ahead and sharpen it and grind it in this case. Up to speed. On the platform, slide it up to the wheel, pass across, a couple strokes, opposite side, same thing. Okay, here's the tool as it just came off the grinder. I don't know if you can see this in the video, but the light in the room allows me to see that right along this edge there's a small burr. And if I touch this edge, it feels pretty sharp. But what happened is that burr is like this. The metal is so thin that the edge is rolled over. And because it's rolled over, it's not as sharp as it can be. So I'm going to do one more thing. I have here a strop. This is just a board with a piece of leather belt attached to it, and I've rubbed it with a little bit of abrasive, and I'm going to take this and not push it into it, but I'm going to stroke. And you can't see it, but I can see that burr turning up here. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to push the burr the other direction. And after about 2 or 3 strokes, that burr will break off. And when I now come to feel the edge, as one of our famous turners said, that's scary sharp. Don't always have to do this. This is the most aggressive sharpening technique we'll have to do. Many times, after it gets a little dull, I can simply come and strop it again. And if that's not good enough, I take one of those diamond wheel hones or that little pocket card I showed you earlier, and I can do that. And the very last, most aggressive way to do that is to do what I've just done. So let's go back to the lathe again. and make some more cuts now that we have a sharp edge. Okay, back to the lathe. And I wanted to show you a cut that I referred to in the first lesson that we'd finish off using the Skew Chisel. I'm going to take this piece off and replace it with the one that had the square shoulder on it. Remember, we talked about having square shoulders as a thing that we need to do in many furniture operations. So I'm going to put this piece back on the lathe again. Check its tightness, make sure everything's locked. Okay. So last time we used the spindle roughing gouge to bring this down, but we couldn't clean this corner up very well. So now I'm going to do that with my Skew Chisel. First cut is going to be to come along here and clean that surface. The second cut is using that V-cut to come in here and clean up this corner. Still about 1500, that sounds good. Rub the bevel, find the angle. Down close, and I want to clean up this end here. You heard that bounce just a little tap, 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 and that was because this piece hadn't been on the lathe. I put it back on and it wasn't quite perfectly aligned. It is running smooth now. That's a nice surface. So now I want to clean up this corner down here. I'm going to move the tool rest out just a smidge, and I'm going to do that V-cut. And I've kind of gone down in here so that when I make this finished cut along here, I'll take that little shoulder right off. This is the short point of the tool. I probably could have done it with a long point by bringing the handle around a little farther. And right down to that shoulder. Now, what I have here is a nice, well, actually I need to come down a little bit farther. I see I had a little chip in here. But the surface down in here is very, very clean and very crisp. But it needs to be just a little longer. Clean down with my V-cut. And come across with my planing cut. And now we have a nice crisp corner and something that a furniture person could work with. So that's applying the V-cut in another way to clean up this corner here. So what we've done today, we've talked a little bit about the basic Skew Chisel. We've talked about the different shapes, sharpening, the planing cut, the V-cut, and how a V-cut might be applied in a furniture situation. Next lesson, we're going to change tools and go to probably one of the most difficult tools to learn in basic wood turning, and that is the shallow fluted gouge turning beads and coves. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, by the way, I forgot to cover it earlier, but many times in the process of making a turning with my Skew Chisel, I stop and hone, and I told you we don't normally go to the grinder very often. So here's my hone, my little pocket $15 600 mesh pocket hone, and this is what I do. Tools in my hand, heel, bevel, few strokes, flip it, heel, bevel. You can't see it, but I can see that little burr coming up there again. And I'll do that and go back to cutting, and I might stop and do this a number of times. This sits in my pocket all the time. Just forgot to mention it.